to the second episode of Next-Gen Procurement. I am joined by my esteemed guest, Roy Anderson from Northeastern University. And today we're here to talk about my favorite topic, which is procurement technology. Roy, you want to start off by giving us the nickel tour about Roy Anderson?
Yeah, nickel tour, 42 years in industry. Started with Raytheon and Textron, military DoD procurement, and the FAR and all those issues. Then moved into financial services, grew out the Fidelity Investments procurement organization, homegrown, procure to pay, EDI. Then CPO at John Hancock, MetLife, State Street. Ran my own company, Go Procure, and for a decade, and then jumped into teaching full time. I taught in the past with Rutgers and the like, but now with Northeastern. And as I was just telling Anders, I'm starting my doctoral program in September at Babson College.
Sounds excruciing, but
excruciating.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you got nothing else to do, why not get a PhD?
That's right.
Sorry, a DBA.
Yeah.
For those of you who are joining now, please drop where you're calling in from in your comments, and so we can get some conversation going. And if you have any questions at all, feel free to drop them in the chat. So I'm Anders Lillevik. I'm the founder of Focal Point. I started Focal Point 5 years ago after having spent not as much time as Roy in procurement, but I spent 25 years in procurement and decided it was time to start something new. And that's why Focal Point is here. So can we advance to the next slide, please? So today we are going to talk about technical competencies and tools for future procurement leaders. So there's a lot of changes in procurement and procurement technology. And as you can see, I've actually seen some of these computers that are on this screen. Yeah. Kind of it blows my mind a little bit, right? Think about how the technology has changed and how much processing power now sits in the palm of your hand compared to what you were using before. But essentially, we're here to talk about what procurement technology now is starting to look like, what people need to think about as they're advancing on this journey, and what are the tools and knowledge and skills that folks need going forward. So about sum it up, Roy?
Yeah, it's amazingly fast and getting much faster.
All right. So let's get to topic number one. And Roy, I'm going to let you start by answering this.
Sure.
How do you know the time is right to invest in new technology? Because it always seems like people are waiting for something.
Yeah, those that wait lose, period. You will never get, so far ahead of the technology that because you just can't implement it fast enough. My issue is take a pain area that utilizes a lot of bandwidth, meaning your human capital, which is the most important part. And if it takes up a lot of human capital, you've got to replace it with technology. What does that mean? The human capital has to change. Absolutely. The skill sets have to change, and we'll get into that later. But now's the time. There is no yesterday, done. Tomorrow just keeps going forever. Today, find your areas of opportunity, understand what the potential is in terms of each element. And I would stay with the fundamentals that creates clean data going forward so that you can streamline and automate and then take advantage of the AI tools that are coming due.
That's an interesting question, right? So I always looked at it a little bit differently, right? First of all, you're absolutely correct. But the way I kind of look at it is when you start having your incumbent providers saying, no, we can't do that, or we don't do it this way, every time you come to them with a new requirement that you're hearing about in the industry, right? So if you're dealing with some of the legacy source to pay, or you have a stack of point solutions and you just aren't keeping up with the time, so to speak, I think that's a good time to sort of start thinking about either reinstalling the stuff that you already have, because you don't necessarily have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you have a modern solution that could be upgraded, maybe that's a good way of going at it, or then start looking at new technology.
Yeah, I'm a big believer that if you have something in place, use it to its fullest, challenge that supplier to be able to expand appropriately. But if they're not, then you need to move. But I would suggest that as the leader of an organization, and filter this down through your entire organization, get out there, find out what's coming, what's down the line, what you can incorporate, what are the best and brightest ideas, because you want to always be the creative element inside the organization. That doesn't mean bleeding edge, even though most of my career was bleeding edge, and I enjoyed it out there because I wanted to push the technology. But be out there so that you can bring in those things that are going to make an impact to your organization. So one, you have to know your organization. Two, where the pain points that you're not able to support and technology can, and then make sure that you're talking to the best and brightest in the industry to know what is the next generation that you want to be a part of.
Amazing. And when people go and try to implement new technology, are you envisaging that they come pre-baked with a business case about how much they're going to save from time, effort, cost, and so on and so forth?
Well, I'm a believer that you have to have an ROI for the CFO to give you anything. But I'm also a believer that your budget has to be flexible, and you're going to lose headcount, which is good. You want to lose headcount costs and move that into technology base. So their actual cost to the organization is equal or lower than it was last year or the year before. But the output, the capability is going to be that much greater, because the technology will create synergies with your internal teams. Of course, that gets us to the other slides. You have to have the skill sets in order to be able to take advantage of it.
Correct. So maybe before we go into skill sets, we can get to topic 2. And this is an interesting thing, right? Because I've posted a bit about this, is when we approach prospects and so on, and we say, look, we got this whiz-bang tool that can do this, this, and this. And they will say something interesting like, well, we already implemented SAP, or we implemented whatever, like an ERP or a source-to-pay system. We don't need this. And I sometimes chuckle at that, but maybe you can tell us, like, well, how do you see the big differences between what I would call legacy technology versus current technology that's being built and implemented right now?
Well, I would suggest to you that legacy technology, slower, bigger, harder to manage, very difficult to change. Of course, the question is how far back do you go? Are you in the ERP systems, or are we actually still talking about legacy programs that move from client server to the cloud? Great, they're on the cloud. That's wonderful. But realistically, the next generation technologies are much more like your apps on your phone. They are very, very streamlined. They are easy to use, very decentralized in their power structure. And you want to take advantage of that decentralization. Let the internal customer be able to get the things that they need done, but make them so they happen within your contractual ecosystem that you've built out. But the technologies of today are much more mobile centric.
Agreed 100%. My frustration by implementing some of the former solutions, the old solutions, is it does one thing in one way. And that's the only way you can really deploy it. How much more flexibility have you seen built into the new technology landscape of today?
Oh, well, they're starting to realize just how big the landscape is. I mean, before, procurement was a catalog, a workflow, a PO, and an invoice. Now, the whole idea of risk and sustainability tied into multi-tiered suppliers and end-to-end supply chain requirements, IoT, blockchain, all those tools have to become very able to absorb in data. And then that's where AI comes in, to be able to analyze that data more effectively so you can make better decisions. And have I said this? It all comes down to the skills of the person being able to use it.
Right. Yeah, and to me, it was fascinating as we are building the solution out, how quickly the inputs and outputs are changing related to the universe of providers that we need to connect to and be nimble to get that set up in a matter of days. And now if someone says, oh, we need to build an AI agent that does X, Y, and Z, and being able to just build that on the fly, plug it in, and make it part of the workflow, And these are things that we couldn't even dream about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Right?
Now, and understand though, there's also a lot of suppliers that are bringing in those technologies as play, where we used to be able to have a do it in facilities and leasing and labor management. Now the service provider, it's like, hey, if you're going to utilize a service, they bring in the MSP technologies. The leasing providers bring in the technology. So now it is not as much about you having to carry the load of having all those technologies internal, even though they're sitting on the cloud. But now it's just a matter of, can you integrate them so that the user experience within the company has a common look and feel, common data flow, so that you can take advantage of all of it.
Amazing. Moving right along to how to implement software or solutions now. Back in the day, we used to basically put budget for maybe 1, maybe 2x the SaaS fee to do an implementation of procurement technology. And we would measure go live in years. Is that still the case?
Oh, I had a flashback to those days. That was just painful. No, now literally you can get up in some of these tools in a day. I mean, you can get up and started with these tools and build it, let it start to add content and be useful in a day. So I'm really excited about the fact that every tool that you put in today should have an immediate payback and allow you to be able to do more with less, which is kind of an old concept, but it's still very relevant. The tool should take the burden away of any transactional work that happens, and layer upon layer. So you get rid of transactions, and then there's another layer of transactional work that's aggregated, gets rid of those transactions. So as you get deeper and deeper into something, the tool should be able to take over that work, let the user do it, let the supplier do it, or the technology does it from end to end, so that the internal team that is driving change management, driving innovation, driving early adoption design, those skill sets can be focused most importantly where the return is greatest.
100%. And it's interesting, right? So I've been in procurement for a minute, and it was always interesting to me that we would sign a 3-year SaaS deal. The SaaS clock would start ticking its contract signature. And after a year of implementation, we have 2 years left on the deal. So basically a year's worth of value is flushed down the drain, plus having to pay for implementation fees on top of that. And it was always an interesting ROI calculation to try to recoup those fees. The other thing that I'm seeing is people are now starting with base use cases and adding to that. So we have one customer that we talked to this morning. We signed the contract a few weeks ago. We had the kickoff meeting today, and we think we're going to be able to go live with 11,000 users for intake next week. And it's super interesting to me because it would be absurd to think about that in the past.
Yeah.
And implementation now, it looks like adding immediate value by getting folk to use one part of the solution as you then building the rest of it. And it kind of changes the dynamic significantly, because I remember back in the day when you would have one of the big SIs configuring a system back in the day, and then all of a sudden it's a big reveal, like here's a thing for UAT, and that's the first time you actually got hands in the system. And now we have people in the system like almost on day one, going alongside us as we're setting things up and doing config. It's changing significantly.
And the setups aren't set in stone. Now the setups are dynamic. They're growing with the organization, the better utilization of the technology going forward. And I actually think, of course, as a software provider, someone that's got to spend money to develop that capability, there's got to be a revenue stream that makes it worthwhile for everyone. Sometimes procurement people think they should get stuff for free. But you're dealing with such a huge, whether you have a $500 million, $1 billion, $3 billion, or in some of the big cases, $20-40 billion in spend, your ability to manage it, even by a small amount, brings a massive amount of cash back to the organization. And I would suggest to you that with these implementations and these technologies is the working with the CFO on what is an ROI, what is cash back, what is value to the organization that can be shown by either increased revenues, lower total cost, more innovation, lower risk. Because risk is a cost. And if you can mitigate that risk, you can mitigate that cost structure. Unfortunately, risk doesn't hit the balance sheet until something bad happens. But the goal is to not ever allow something bad to happen. We're doing things are not as an insurance policy to pay when bad happens, but to be the proactive technology enabler that allows us to find and eliminate problems before they happen. That is amazingly valuable to the company, but incredibly hard to put a currency around it.
For sure. 100%. And I couldn't agree more. It's changing rapidly. So let's move into the final question, and the one that you've been chomping at the bit to answer. and that is, now that, you and I are sort of looking towards retirement or maybe our doctorate or whatever the case may be, what are the skills then that are required to operate new technology, new processes, new landscapes?
Well, I believe that the technology today is so user-centric, and the internal customers are actually the drivers. Like you're putting in 11,000. Well, that's certainly not 11,000 procurement people. That's 11,000 users that are out there that use this once a day, once a week, once a month, even in some cases once a year. So it's got to be so easy to use that it's not about training that we used to do all the time, but the fact that the users are going to use it. And now data is going to come from that activity. Activity is going to be driven from that. AI opportunities are going to be able to come from that. I believe the skill sets of the core sourcing, procurement, supply chain team now is to be focused on specialization, be able to be the expert in a particular category of spend that is valuable to the company, to be able to make a difference, to be able to talk face to face with the EVP of that structure, whether it be engineering or production or design or marketing or advertising or legal, whatever categories, whether indirect or direct. We need to have those level expertise either in our core team or as a third party expert that we can call in as necessary. So one of the skill sets is specialization in the categories that are going to move the needle on your bill of materials / cost structure. Second skill set is, I think, being able to get innovation from your suppliers. So my discussion with students has always been, over time, the whole supply chain world has been outsourcing constantly. We're outsourcing mailrooms, cafeteria services, facilities activity, labor management activity, payrolling activity. More and more services are going to a third party because they're better, faster, and they bring the technology to it at no additional cost. So you lower the whole structure. You start to focus on the labor on what your core skills are for the company. Great, wonderful, absolutely. But that means fewer and fewer people per revenue dollar come from inside the company. More and more of the people and the ideas are coming from your suppliers. So one of the skill sets that you have to pull as a sourcing procurement leader is, how do you pull innovation from your suppliers? Because the next new product is probably going to come from an idea from your supplier versus an idea from someone inside the organization.
Yeah, and it's a very good question. I always ask this, like, when was the last time you asked your suppliers, how are they deploying this technology to maximize the benefit? And it's kind of, a lot of folks go through the painful implementation process and get up and running, and then they say, okay, now we're good, right? We don't have to do anything else. And that's how you become stale. Now, I had this discussion with the chief procurement officer the other day. He goes, Anders, now that a lot of these analytical tasks are getting done for you by AI, how do we train people to become procurement executives or procurement professionals now that a lot of these, what I would say, lower level things are being out-tasked to technology?
Well, can you train them? Maybe. But in terms, so the things I was talking about, specialization, I actually believe you have to hire experts from that area, bring people in from advertising the world, bring people in from the engineering world, bring people in that have that desire, that passion to be the best engineer, and then realize they can become the head of sourcing for engineering for the entire company. They'll be dealing with presidents of engineering services companies. They'll be dealing with the EVP of engineering inside the company. They'll have a bigger play at an earlier part of their career by being in the sourcing function for engineering, and take it by every category. So some of it is better hiring practices rather than training. Two, but creativity can come from anywhere. And if you have people that see the fact that data is now rich in information, that there's lots of data, way more data than we can possibly absorb into a human element activity that we used to do. But the fact that we can take advantage of the AI engines that each of the tools are creating and building to be able to start doing proactive activity on risk, to be more effective in our sustainability activities, to start thinking in the design world about how products and services, how the goods can become circular. I mean, that is a beautiful mix of the design, the R&D effort of your company, and the sourcing suppliers to say, hey, instead of using that throwaway material or that caustic material in your design, we have suppliers that provide a recoverable material that has a sustainability level that can be repaired, reused, refurbished before it gets recycled. That level of understanding has never been in the procurement function before. And now I think it's literally top of mind that we have to be there in support of the R&D effort. And that's a whole different level of skill and creativity and understanding of the product that we never brought to the table before.
And, it's interesting. You and I had almost the same question. So the same answer to that question is we probably will pull people from the business that have understanding of the categories as users, and then having sort of the procurement tasks, I wouldn't say automated, but certainly streamlined significantly so that you can worry about getting requirements, making sure the suppliers are doing the stuff they're supposed to do, and then having, the technology more or less facilitate the process as it's supposed to, rather than sort of, figuring out how to build the best RFP, for example, right?
That's right. Now, what I found is that I was a successful skill level developer when my internal customers started pulling from me to fill their requirements. So as soon as I oh, how do you like that? They took my advertising person. That means I'm doing the right thing to bring in the talent, that they realize the talent I have is equal to or better than the talent they have. Then I know that I'm hiring the right people. I'm developing the skill sets in terms of how to deal with suppliers, how to negotiate effectively, how to, on a win-win environment, how to create innovation, understanding the sustainability effort. And they're starting to realize that they can't get that mix of skills anywhere else but within the procurement function. And then I can keep bringing those people in, and I become a source of talent for the rest of the organization. That I always considered a real nice nod to skills development.
So before we sort of move on here, so if there's any questions at all from audience members, please feel free to add them to the chat. We're about to wrap up in the next 4 or 5 minutes here. So if there's anything you want to answer, please let us know. What are the students thinking that procurement careers are looking like now? I'm always interested in that as we're talking about this.
Yeah. So many of my students on the graduate level are in other careers, finance, engineering, medical, and they come in because most of their advisors will tell them, hey, you're going to be dealing with suppliers your whole life. Find out what this sourcing and negotiation is all about so that you actually have that as a skill set to be able to support your future endeavors. Once they realize the intensity of data, research, category strategy, world elements that impact categories, I do a current events because every single day there's something happening in the world that's impacting the supply chain, whether it's people attacking ships in the Red Sea or whether the Suez Canal has got some lockup or the Panama Canal. So shipping is one issue, the South China Sea. Then you get into rare earth metals, and then the whole idea of droughts and fires, and we just had floods that come through that rip through industrial sectors, rip through areas where products and services are being produced, which changes the risk level. So people start to see the picture that everything that they buy, everything that they touch comes from the supply chain. So it opens the world as to how their engineering background or finance background impacts supply chain. And it makes them realize how important supply chain is to their livelihood.
Yeah, people just expect the iPhone to show up in the store, right? They have no
Just
idea
show up.
how they have no idea what a bomb is or a bill of material is and how that goes into it. Like, it's always fascinating to me.
Yeah, so I find that it opens up their eyes. Individuals from that side go, you know what? I think there's an opportunity for me. So a career path switch. And what I tell most of them, it's really hard to get in, but once you're in, you see great opportunities to grow if you've got that creativity, innovative spark, have an understanding how technology drives this activity, and then can be the change agent. And I tell you, some people just don't have that skill set. They don't have empathy for their internal customers, because everything we try to do, it's changing something. That's changing the product, changing the supplier, changing the approach. So the internal customer is always feeling like, well, how come I have to take the risk? So, you have to be a change agent that has empathy for those individuals, because the technology you're implementing is not just once and done. The internal customer sees it as a change of how they do business. And you have to realize change management is a skill set that's got to be developed.
Yeah, and I think that is, if we go to the next slide here, that is what we're going to be talking about in our next episode here. We're going to talk about the soft skills that is necessary for procurement. So the analogy I like to sort of say is, the further up in the organization I became, the less of a doer I was and the more of a politician I became. And it was all about making sure that you got stakeholders on side, executive sponsorship, even sponsorship from the supplier CEO. So this is what we're going to talk about next week, or next episode. And if you scan that QR code, you should be getting an invitation to next episode. Any parting remarks as we sort of get done with this tectonic shift episode?
Yeah, the technology is crucial. Everyone has to incorporate it, find trust with those players that you're working with, and that the technology is going to make or break your ability to eliminate transactional work. If you can't get rid of transactional work, you're forever going to be stuck in the doldrums as a team. You have to eliminate 99.9% of all of that work. Let the AI engines take more hold of negotiations and activity and actions, so that your team can rise to the area where they are going to be recognized as experts in the company. And that's how you get to the boardroom of these companies.
All right. Thank you so much, Roy. Always a pleasure having you on, and I look forward to the next episode. And please
Sounds good. Thanks, Andres.
Thanks, guys.